welcome to Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos, honored to be joined today by Mr. Tom Rice. He is a veteran of the Screaming Eagles, the 101st Airborne Division of the U.S. Army, and he is also a veteran of World War II and parachuted into Normandy on D-Day 75 years ago. Tom, thank you very much for your time today, sir.
Well, thank you for thanking me.
Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Coronado, California, and raised in the same place. Still live in the same house, the same property.
Wow, you're a lifer.
Oh, yes.
Excellent. When did you join the service?
When? In around 1943, I joined the service. I volunteered for everything. My serial number was 1916-48-59, and the first digit indicates a volunteer. If it was a 3, then you're a draftee.
Why did you choose the Army?
Because I was a risk taker. And my father was killed in a naval air crash in 1934, so I wandered as I wandered. And for the most part, made my own way and took all the risks that were possible.
So after you joined the service, you were at both Camp Toccoa and Fort Benning. What was that training like?
Well, we originally started at Camp Toccoa, Georgia, a small CCC camp deep in the northeastern woods. For the most part, it was closed, but it was reactivated and kept quiet that we were not to be seen or known for 13 weeks as we trained in everything that was experimental. We did such experiments that you wouldn't believe. It was tough going. The regimental colonel wanted athletes and college kids, and I qualified for both. I had 2 years of college before I went in, and I was an athlete running the mile and the 2 miles.
Did being a paratrooper come naturally to you?
That was easy enough because I was in a good physical condition. And the regimental colonel probably went through 4,000 individuals to get 2,000. We were a large group. The first time when we came in there in Camp Toccoa, Georgia, on Thanksgiving Day, we grouped at an old C-47 body that was just to make construction, climbed a ladder to 36 feet, and they strapped on a harness, and the harness was connected to a cable on the other side of the C-47, and they gave us the D-ring and a reserve parachute, and we were told to jump out, not to look down, but to look out, and transfer the D-ring from one hand to the other. If you fail that, you're in deep trouble.
When did you go to England?
After our training on 3 or 4 different levels for efficiency and coordination with other regiments and the division, we went to Camp Miles Standish in Boston and were there for several days being processed. And we left for England on the William G. Gothel's steel reinforced concrete Liberty ship with bunks 18 high, 2 feet wide, and 6 feet long. There was a convoy. We were traveling about 10 knots an hour, and we landed in Glasgow, Scotland on January 1, 1944. I had the mumps on board ship, so I got special treatment and isolation.
How long did it take you to recover?
10 days, plus another 10 days in a hospital in Scotland to make sure that things were correct and proper and healthy.
I was going to say you had about 5 months between the time you got there and D-Day, but about half of the first month was taking care of the mumps. So what did you do for the next 4.5 months to get ready?
We were all cleared and mumpless. And when we ended up in Camp Lambourne in England, and we started our training, most of it revolves around activities that we would be doing in Normandy, not knowing that we were going to Normandy, but somewhere on the coast of France for sure. So there was Operation Eagle, Beaver, and one other final one that brought us jumping from GI trucks instead of the aircraft because the German bombers were overhead.
When did you learn what exactly your mission would be?
I was unaware of the mission. I was assigned to a Lieutenant Colonel Carroll. I had to know what he's doing, why he's doing it, where he was, and had to be able to make contact with him immediately. He was the executive officer of the regiment. So most of the fellows in the regiment saw the area in which they were going to jump in a fabricated diorama depicted at 3,000 feet. I didn't get to see that because I had to work with the colonel.
So talk about the night that you embarked.
Several things happened. We moved from our barracks, our shanties in Lambourne to present ourselves in good physical shape with the regimental colonel, who stood on a jeep covered with a camouflage parachute and gave us a speech like a Newt Rodney football game speech. He was a knife thrower and had a large Bowie knife on his leg, and he had a 4 foot by 8 foot piece of plywood 3/4 of an inch thick with Tojo on one side and Hitler on the other side. He'd stand at about 50 feet and throw that Bowie knife. But in the beginning of his speech, we called it the knife speech after we heard it, and whatever amounts of speaking he could get through to us, because it was a laughable situation. He reached down to pull out his Bowie knife and it wouldn't come out. So everybody starts laughing, and he reached for his M1 a trench knife and threw that, and it hit the target. And so we all clapped, and he wanted to shake hands with every one of us. So we lined up, and he gave us his admonitions, and we went on for dinner. We had steak and peas, as I remember. And then from there, a shower. And then we walked over to our aircraft. Our jump master was Lieutenant Ed Jansen. He was about a 15% Cherokee Indian. So he knew what he was doing and how to fight. And he didn't carry a tomahawk or bow and arrow, but he had a carbine and a sidearm. So I worked with him. And one of the fellows in the squad, Marvin Van Buskirk, after taking a shower, left his dog tags hanging in the shower. And he notified me halfway to the aircraft that that's what had happened. He didn't have them. So I said, okay, we'll take your equipment, Marvin, go back to the shower and see if you can find them. If you can't, then catch up with us and meet us at the aircraft. He couldn't find them. So we tore off 2 pieces of canvas and printed his name on it. He had the best dog tags in the history of the military because they didn't clank when you ran and rattled in the mess kit. So from there, we packed and repacked our bundles, the equipment we could not carry on our bodies personally, such as machine guns and heavy ammunition, mortar bombs for the mortar, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of military knickknacks that, for the most part, were just too heavy, including radio equipment. So everything we did at that point and up to and including combat was experimental. We're in the aircraft. We practiced dropping the bundles twice to see that everything was working. We never met the pilot, the co-pilot, and the crew chief, but we saw them wandering around. Some of the fellas wiped their fingers through the exhaust pipes of the engine and put smeared exhaust on their faces, mixed with a little bit of oil from the crankcase. It made Indian fashion out of it for the most part. And then we boarded. I was the last man to board because I always jumped number 1. And we loaded a bundle inside the aircraft, which would be placed in the door just before I jumped. So after all of this repetitive activity that was going on, we boarded at 8:41 English double summertime. And I think the takeoff was at Merrifield Airdrome. There was 11 of them there. And it was in a shape of a V of V's. Section 16 had 45 aircraft, all C-47s, and within that Section 16 were 3 aircraft in the shape of a V. I was on the right forward one on the VFVs. It takes 9 planes to carry a load of 128 jumpers. We took off at the proper speed, and the engines and the material started to rattle, bang, and I thought the whole machinery was going to come apart on us, but it didn't. I slightly remember General Eisenhower on the field to give us a visit, and he stepped forward from his entourage of people and gave us a salute as we passed by. So I was in the door for the most of the time, and the rest of the guys were sitting sideways as best they could, with looking out the window, trying to discover where we're going and how and where we were. So we were in that area for probably a week and getting orientation, and the takeoff was smooth. We assembled at 5,000 feet. The entire armada was 200 miles long, 10 miles wide, with approximately 982 C-47s. And it took about 2 hours to bring us in and unload us on the continent of Europe, on the western coast of the Cotton Peninsula. So from 5,000 feet, we moved down to the code name Portsmouth, and its code name was Portsmouth Bill. We passed over that and then dropped to 1,500 feet to get under German radar. About the middle of the English Channel was a U.S. submarine that gave us a signal that we were on target and moving properly. And then we flew up the Bay of Biscay with the Brittany Peninsula on our right, and on our left the Cotton Peninsula. That was really a smart move, because we could have turned right and gone into Brittany, or left and gone to the Cotton Peninsula. We turned left at another submarine that was in the Bay of Biscay, gave us a signal, and we entered the Cotton Peninsula. I don't know exactly the time it was, but the lights started flashing over the door. There was a white light while we're in flight, a green light, and a red light. And as we looked at, I looked out the door of the C-47, and the red light went on. That gives us approximately 8 minutes to get organized and ready to jump. So the jump master gave visual and verbal signals. You couldn't hear much in the aircraft anyway, because we didn't have a door that was open. We didn't even have a door. And we had a bundle that was standing right next to me as I stood in the door. Lieutenant Jansen went to number 18 jumper and checked him and made sure that he was okay after he gave the signal to stand up and hook up. Now, there's a steel cable that runs from the pilot's cabin to the aft of the aircraft, and we hook up on that. And that had to be done correctly, otherwise you could get your arm wrapped around the webbing and you're going to lose it for sure. So Lieutenant Jansen checks number 18 and pats him on the derriere, and 18 says all okay, and 17 does the same thing, and so goes on up to me to number 2 and number 3 men. They had a special responsibility of turning on electrical switches and pulling toggles to drop the bundles underneath the aircraft. There were 6 of them, and they weighed 300 pounds each. So that's 1,800 pounds plus the one on the door. At the signal of the red light, we all stood up, hooked up, and checked equipment, and closed up tight. So with all the equipment we had, it was a pretty tight squeeze in there with 18 men standing. We were traveling at 276 miles an hour, and no self-sealing gas tanks. There's a good possibility that machine gun fire was coming up through the bottom of the aircraft, but I wasn't positive about that because I didn't feel any bullets changing my plumbing. After the command stand in the door, I put my left toe outside of the aircraft at the arch and the 2 hands on either side of the door and squatted just a little bit. So 276 miles an hour, prop blast at excessive speed. We can't jump at that excessive speed. We jump between 90 and 100 miles an hour. We're doing nearly twice that. So Lieutenant Jansen made communication with the pilot and asked him to slow the thing down. That didn't happen. And about that time, I was viewing a rectangular corridor of anti-aircraft fire exploding at about 1,000 feet. So it looks like we're going right through it. Now, you know about the crickets?
Yes.
Do we need to explain anything there?
Each person had a cricket, and you clicked it once, and the response had to be 2 clicks.
The response would be 1 click. We'd click it once, we'd listen, another click, then we'd move toward that click with 2 clicks.
I got you.
Move again to 3 clicks. By the time we got to 4th or 5th clicks, we might have been standing within 10 yards of one another. As the green light went on and the red light goes out and the white light is out, I stepped outside the door and I was in a crouched position, and the aircraft went up about 50 feet because the 1,800 pounds of load underneath the aircraft was a good release for it. And I was in a squatting position, so when I stepped out, my left arm got caught in the lower left-hand corner of the door because I was squeezed tight, brought my shoulder blades together, and assumed the right position. So I swung out from that point, swung back in and hit the side of the aircraft, swung out again and back in again, and I turned just enough to get my arm loose. And I got a $285 Hamilton wristwatch, which was a real prize then, and it got ripped off. So probably some good Frenchman found it and kept it as a souvenir. Had my name printed on it also. So I made about 2 or 3 oscillations and hit the ground rolling in a pretty good position, rolling forward. All the equipment I had on, the musette bag came up in front of me, the reserve parachute was in the way, and I couldn't see where I was or what I was doing, but I knew instinctively what to do. I tried to hit the safety piece of equipment that released all the metal clasps that were released, that we could step right out of it. That didn't work. So I opened up my double zipper under my chin and pulled out my switchblade knife and started cutting through it. Number 2 and 3 men came up, and we 3 got together, and they had a mortar, and we crossed a small canal and got on the decomposed granite road. My clicker, for the most part, fell out of my zippered pouch, and I never did find it. So we used the other guys. We heard a few clicks and waited, and within about 5 or 6 minutes, about 60 guys came up from our left. Now, they would have jumped number 1 through 9 in the direction of the flight of the aircraft. Number 10 through 18 would jump properly and then reverse their direction of flight and return to a particular midpoint. That never did happen. We were spread over a couple hundred square miles, and the company never got together for an entire week. I didn't see the company commander for a week and a half. So we played cat and mouse. We had a lot of fun destroying communications as best we could, everywhere we could. And our major objective was to take Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, prevent the German tanks from coming in, and disperse all of the German 6th and 1st Parachute Infantry regiments. Now, one of them was in Carentan. One battalion was in Carentan. Another one was in Perrières, and the other one was moving away from the beachheads, didn't find what they wanted, and probably reestablished a strong point, W5, with a German lieutenant were janky in there. They had what we called Goliaths, a radio-operated four-wheeled vehicle with 200 pounds of explosive on it. When the beach forces came in, they were surprised at that. They just shot it up and explosions went off. So they got rid of those in a hurry.
What kind of resistance did you run into?
Immediately, nothing. I landed, for the most part, on Drop Zone D, the northernmost section of Drop Zone D, in dry ground. And I cut my way out. Number 2 and 3 men came up. And then after we grouped together, marching down the road in good formation, I saw a farmhouse about 50 yards off the side of the road and decided we shouldn't investigate that. We had more hand grenades. We had Germans, so I took Floyd Martin to the front door of the house, and I told him, Floyd, don't beat on the door like an ugly American. Just knock on it like a gentleman, and sent the rest of them around to the rear of the house in case there were Germans. He pounded on it, and you could hear that noise from Carentan to San Miraglise. And a Frenchman, within 30 seconds, very blasé about everything because he'd been occupied for 4 or 5 years, came to the door, and he was dressed in a long white nightgown from shoulder to floor. He had a nightcap with a little puffball of cotton on the end of it dangling over one side of his face, and he had a dish with a lighted candle in it. Now, what does that remind you of? The initials in an English play are CD.
Charles Dickens?
Yeah. What's the name of the play?
Christmas Carol?
Yeah, right. You got it. Christmas Carol. And I saw that and I started to laugh. And I suddenly realized that I was making a mistake because my mind was carried away from a joyous situation of sitting in a theater watching a Christmas Carol while I'm actually forced my way into combat. So I immediately brought myself back into realization of a situation rightly understood. So we pushed him aside and put the maps on the floor, and I said Carentan about 5 times, and he pointed in several directions. And in the meantime, his wife came in dressed the same way. We indicated we're not going to harm and do anything. We want to know where Carentan is so we can get out of here. So he left in about 30 seconds, returned with 8 rounds of ammunition, gave us 6, and they kept 2. And so off we went and assembled. And the other story is where we went and what we did and how we did it. But that takes a long time because we played Halloween that night.
At what point did you realize that the Allies had secured the beachheads?
Well, my second lieutenant as a platoon officer had volunteered to lead a platoon to protect General Taylor. And after he landed, General Taylor gave him the strict order of moving to Causeway 4, which was a raised roadway that led to the English Channel parallel to the Douvre River, and make contact with the beach forces coming in. He did that, and the point of contact by time-wise was 11:05 a.m., June 6th. And that has been misrecorded several times, so I would reaffirm that from his words, it was 11:05. And he made contact and then rejoined us a little bit later. We fought for 37 days, playing cat and mouse and destroying communications everywhere we could and organizing our group. So we had 326th, 327th glider infantry people with us. We had 506 people and probably 1 or 2 502 regimental paratroopers. So it was a mixed bunch, and we did what we were supposed to do, and we did it in a hurry.
How long did it take you to find your unit?
About a week to a week and a half. They were spread some 90 miles away. Company commander jumped with 5 or 6 guys and was able to pull them together as a squad. Here's the captain, the company commander, captain leading a squad of 5 or 6 men. And so they moved during the night and settled in hiding in the day. Before we jumped, General Eisenhower, as I mentioned, came to us and wanted to know how creative we were. He wants creativity, and he wanted to know how much dog there is in the fight and how much fight there is in the dog. So we told him not to worry about it. We're here to do what we're supposed to do. He indicated, well, he was worried about 80% of you guys being killed. The actual number was 38 that, for the most part, didn't make it. And after he left the takeoff, etc., and the jump, and then we maneuvered around, leaving the little farmhouse, and fought for 37 days, doing all the kinds of things that we wanted. Some individually, some collectively, but we moved fast. And the creativity was important because there were not many vehicles in Normandy, mostly carts carrying ammunition. So to plant a mine in the center of the road with a vehicle, if the driver saw it, he'd stop and investigate. But in moving with a cart load with ammunition, and he saw it covered with horse manure, he'd pay no attention to it and drive right over it, and then an explosion occurred, and that cart and the soldiers would be destroyed. So it was that kind of hit and run activity. The French farmer, for the most part, were very appreciative of what we were doing, and they gave us milk and cheese and bread, and we hid out as we could, so we could move during the night. So it took about a week to a week and a half to assemble.
So, and I've read from Stephen Ambrose and others that the ingenuity, the adaptability, the improvisation of the American soldier was what really won the day.
Oh yeah, we did. We did things from our organization up to, including, and beyond combat. Experimental, innovative, creativity was the key factor, and it carried right on. In fact, our battalion officers in training in Camp Toccoa and from Fort Benning on put chaos in front of us almost every other day. And the idea was to get us tuned into get frightened, brother, get frightened. And then grab a hold of your courage from your fright, take fright apart, and then put it back together again, see what fright made out of you, and then bundle the continuous fright based on all the chaos that's thrown. Store that in the back convoluted areas of your mind, and when you need it, you grab it, and if you get into chaos again, you reduce the chaos to danger, and you reduce the danger to some inconvenience, and then forget it, and get on with your combat mission. So that was a likeness that he would like to hear about, and we told him.
We have a few minutes each for two more stories. So I want to talk about, because you mentioned the 37 days of cat and mouse in Normandy. Then you went back to England for a little bit. And then you were part of Operation Market Garden in the Netherlands.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
The format for the flight was pretty much the same. The 82nd Airborne took the northern route into Brabant or the Holland area. We took the southern route. Our objective was to secure what was typically known as Hell's Highway, all the way up to Arnhem under Operation Market Garden. We accomplished our mission, most part, from time to time. To secure that highway was very difficult. My company jumped in at Vegel, which was about 30 miles north of the borderline of Belgium and Holland, where the British 30th Corps was waiting to blast off. They had to use the highways because the polders, for the most part, were marshy and pretty wet. You can't run tanks over those kinds of terrains. We did the jump on drop zone A1. We missed drop zone A, and we finally made our jump about 8 to 10 seconds later on drop zone A1. So the jump there was 1,250 feet, and as I jumped, made a clean jump on Sunday, September 17th at about 1:30 p.m., nice sunny day. I went up another 50 feet because I got caught in a thermal from all the other aircraft. So I was floating around up there not knowing what to do and just had to sweat it out. And about 500 feet, I could locate a house that I might land on and end up in the kitchen. I was able to maneuver away from that and landed in a fence, an area that I would call a cabbage patch that was surrounded by steel picket fence. And I was quite concerned about being mounted on one of those pointed stanchions, but I missed that one. made a good standing landing, then went to my knees, and my submachine gun got jammed into the muzzle got jammed into the dirt and the mud, and it was not usable for a couple of days. But that was the jump that took place. And then the order, since we were not on the proper drop zone, was to move toward Veghel, Veghel, as quickly as we could. And there was supposed to be an established order, Company A, Company C, Company B, and I don't know, whatever else after that. So we all were running as fast as we could to get organized into Veghel. And en route, we passed through a little village called Driel, and the citizens, the Dutch citizens were out heavy and passing us gingerbread one by 12 inches long, and Calvados, and some champagne. So things were, for the most part, kind of happy and larkish as we moved on towards our objective. We got into the center city, and it was absolute pandemonium. The entire city of Veghel was out in that patio and center city. So we had some fun doing there, enjoying them for a bit until that happened. That was about a 2-hour stint just in the environs of the city square. So we had to get organized. And in so doing, the citizens had to move out of the way, and so we did. And we outposted the city as best we could.
So let's move to the Bulge. That's where you were injured.
Yeah, I didn't get hit with any German ammunition in Holland, but I really got taken out in the Battle of the Bulge. So that's a strange story. But relate it if you want.
Please, yes.
I have taken out many patrols, not to set up a combat situation, but to locate where the enemy is and what he might be doing. So from there, the German position of a main line of resistance, they had outposted in front of that main line resistance snipers. And we had good military formation coming down the long sloping hill toward a little village called Neffy. And we were walking and trying to climb over barbed wire fencing, and that slowed up the process of the squad. So there were about 5 or 6 of us, and I didn't know who the last 2 were, but we had to move out real quickly, and Lieutenant Bonnell gave me 18 Sarepta morphine in case any difficulty occurred and somebody was injured, or someone might have been maimed and in a lot of pain. But as we came down the highway, we were walking perpendicular to it, a decomposed granite road, and on my left was a junction. So I had next to me Arthur Texiera, Scout number 2, and Scout number 1 was John Thomas. I sent him up the left fork of the road into a little village called Neffy, Neffe, and he was cracking through ice and snow, and I'm sure the Germans saw him, but he was not the best of their targets. I saw machine gun firing ahead of him about 50 yards, and I knew just exactly what the Germans were waiting for that entire squad to get into that ditch and then sweep it. I also assumed, and I can't prove it, that they were firing tracers well over our heads, so we'd stand up and then tell each other, they're firing over our heads, so let's keep moving. I don't think that happened, but that crossed my mind. I knew what their technique was. And if they get us up walking, then they fire low, and then they got us. So I told Texiera to bring back number 1 Scout because of the machine gun fire hitting 50 yards ahead of him. He did, so Scout number 1 came back and took the right fork of the road, and he went on in, I guess. But he wasn't instructed to go in, but just to take it and lead us in another direction. That gave the sniper, who was in a building about 450 yards away, standing back from the 3rd or 5th floor, a good sighting of us. Now, he is after the leader of the squad, and that's me. And his objective is to hit me between the lower part of the neck and the top part of the shoulder, the obligato. And once a bullet strikes that, you're through. That is it. You've lost control of everything. So as I moved away from the center of the road and the crossroad area, I saw a haystack, and I thought that might be a good place if we got in trouble to hide out and remake our plans. The sniper saw me for sure, and he fired. Evidently, he thought my knee was my head, and he hit me in the left knee, just above the knee. Now, I didn't know whether it was broken or not because I could feel the blood running into my boot, and we just nicked the artery. Not a full tear of it, but just nicked it enough that I could feel the warmth of my leg in the boot. And I told Texier I'm hit, and so give me a shot of morphine. He gave me a shot of morphine, and I told him to go on in, take the patrol in, it's over. So what happened to the other guys behind him probably was given instructions by Texier, and he took them on in. And so I was out there, had to check that right leg, or rather left leg, to see if it was okay. I don't know whether it was broken or not. So as I got up from the center of the road and swung my right arm up in front of me, I got shot in the right radius. It took about 6 inches of bone out of there. And I didn't even feel it because I'm under morphine. And it was not broken. So I dove toward the haystack, and it was so old and rotten that it just fell apart. And I made sure the sniper couldn't see me at all. So the rest of the guys went in. Now I'm out here 3 or 4 hours, and for the most part, I was frightened that they might send a patrol out to try and get me, or they would set the haystack on fire by machine gun tracers going over our heads and lower them, and fire would begin. But neither of those happened. So a fellow from the squad, John C. Wells, came up from behind me and moving through the ditch and cracking through the ice. And I saw him in the center of the road. And I told him to give me a red butt of your rifle, you take the muzzle, and we'll work our way back in. So we did. It took about an hour to get back up to top of Marsden Hill, and I was put on a jeep and taken to the nunnery, and put on a gurney and wheeled in. On the operating table, I told the surgeon, "I'm hungry, sir." And he ordered the medic to get me a peanut butter sandwich. So while he was running a stick through my forearm, I was eating a peanut butter sandwich, and he was checking the leg. They took my boots off, and I objected to that, but they needed them. So after General Patton broke through in about a week, my wounds occurred on December 22nd at 2 p.m. on a nice, beautiful, terrific Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. I have proof of that on a daily report that someone researched much later. And I was sent to the 121st Field Hospital in Belgium, and I was there a week while a nurse, her name was Lieutenant Janice Van Hees. She was about 6'1" and weighed 165 pounds, and she'd order a German prisoner to take me to the bathroom and back, and so that was done several times. And when I left the 121st Hospital, she tied a great big red ribbon around my neck, and that stayed with me until I got to the American Embassy. And while all the Frenchmen and Dutchmen were laughing their heads off with that, how crazy I looked with this thing around my neck. And then from there, I was sent to England for probably about a half a month and recovered there. And the bed I was in, you had to lie at attention with the sheets underneath your armpits while the surgeon came by and checked the x-rays. And I wasn't there when I was supposed to. I was in another room ironing my shirt with an old World War I flat iron, what it might look like. So he's giving me some questions. What are you doing here, soldier? Well, I filled the air with sulfuric fumes of unknown words, and he stepped back from that. After checking me out, he said, I'll have you out of here in 3 days. Where are you going to send me? ZI me. ZI means Zone of Interior, and Zone of Interior back to the United States. I said, I won't go. So I filled the air again with sulfuric fumes, and so he made arrangements to get me out of here in 3 days. And so I went through the repo depots and caught up with the regiment that had now settled in Birch's Garden.
So you were able to rejoin your unit and get to the Eagle's Nest.
Yeah, I got to the Eagle's Nest, and I didn't see too much of it because the 506 beat us to Birch's Garden, and they were occupying the main part of the city. So when we came in, they had plans for organizing a track team, the 101st Airborne Division track team. I ran the 5,000 meters for them, and we just traveled throughout Europe for a month and a half, running track meets in velodromes, and we had fun doing that. And we lived in the ZLMZ area where there were plenty of cold, icy swimming areas and fields where we could play softball and volleyball. Then we started orderly drill and Class A uniforms, and we objected to that. Here you are, you officers, you're running us combat veterans through all this preliminary stuff again. This is ridiculous. So they beat us to the chicks and the wine, and we just had fun for about a month. They decided to deactivate the 501 Parachute Infantry Regiment because we normally were attached to it to bring our American strength up to the equivalency of the Germans. The Germans had 3,000 in a regiment. We had 2,000. So in the early history of airborne activity, the 501 made up the difference between 2,000 and 3,000. So we're on an equal man-to-man basis with the Germans. So they're going to deactivate the 501, and they instigated a point system where if you were married, you got 10 points. The child, for each child, another 10 points. Any medals, 5 to 10 points. And any lengthy time spent in the combat zone, 5 points, or Hershey bars on your jacket. So I believe the minimum was 72 to get out and go home. I had 98, as most of us veterans did after 38% of casualties from Normandy and Holland. We chose not to jump. And for the most part, we were sent to Marseille and on waited an old ship and went back to Norfolk, Virginia, and sent home discharged with $300 in our pockets.
We just have a minute or two left, but I have to ask you, because you made headlines this year by jumping again into Normandy at nearly the age of 98 years old. Now you are 98. Why was it so important to you to do that again?
The importance was point of the sword, really, because we led the way, and the operation could have failed without the airborne operating in the interior when we first jumped in Normandy. We realized that, and we moved in that direction of indicating to the people of the world that we were one of the best, and we wanted to remain as such, and we were supported by the finest military organization in the history of the world. Had brought us back to Normandy and allowed us to jump. The French passed a law that only people under 80 could jump. They found a way around it, so I was able to jump at 97. So that occurred 2 times, and 1 time in Holland. We had to take a physical exam before we could jump, and they were satisfied with that, so off we went. So we were supported by a grand army of the United States and everything they did to bring us here, including a Team Tom, who were very fine people who knew the battle history of the United States from the early wars up to the present. we were just a great group of people, and they were responsible for me being here today.
Outstanding. Mr. Rice, our time is gone, but thank you for being with us today, and thank you so much for your service to our country. Tom Rice, veteran of the Screaming Eagles, the 101st Airborne Division of the U.S. Army, served at D-Day, also part of Operation Market Garden, and at the Battle of the Bulge. I'm Greg Corombos. This is Veterans Chronicles.